I call this meeting back to order. We are resuming meeting number 111 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Natural Resources. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. I would like to remind participants of the following points. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. All comments should be addressed through the chair. Members, please raise your hand if you wish to speak, whether participating in person or via Zoom. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order the best we can. When we suspended the meeting last Wednesday, we were debating the motion of Ms. Debruson as amended. The speaking list at the time of the suspension, we had Ms. Goodridge, who had the floor. So, Ms. Goodridge, I will turn it over to you. Good to see you online, and please go ahead.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here today from Fort McMurray. It's frustrating beyond belief that we're sitting here debating a motion that is so anti-Alberta. And I know members opposite did point of order after point of order yesterday, the last time we were meeting, trying to justify that having a massive preamble that only talks about Alberta in a negative light is somehow not attacking my province, your province, Mr. Chair. But it is. And I'm not sure how members opposite can sit there, especially members from the Liberal Party, and continually attack the province of Alberta and the cash cow and just treat it like a cash cow. And that's exactly how so many people feel. I know when I'm home in Alberta and I'm talking to people on the streets and out in the grocery stores and throughout our communities, they feel like the Liberal government doesn't listen to them. They feel like they are the whipping boy for, they'll very happily take the resource money, but they don't feel like they are supported in any other way from their government. And this motion furthers that because it continues a negative tone on the province of Alberta, only honing in on abandoned and orphan wells on Alberta, and not even going off of fact. Like, it's not like the preamble uses verified facts that came from perhaps the Alberta Energy Regulator or other sources. It's literally from a news article, and has charged language. But this is what we've come to expect from a government that shows no mercy when it comes to our province. They continually, it's frustrating how they continually put Alberta into such a negative light. And this is one of the challenges that we're going to continue facing on this committee. As long as they have that preamble as part of this motion, it is something that tells every single person in Alberta that they are welcome to work in the energy industry as long as the government is getting some resources revenue from it, but they don't really respect them. And I don't think that's the kind of message we should be sending to Albertans. That's not the kind of message we should be sending to Canadians. We should be working to unite people, not divide them. And yet this motion, from the very preamble of the motion, seeks to divide. It doesn't seek to unite. And so it's very frustrating as we sit here. And I will continue debating this because, frankly, Mr. Chair, this is an attack on your province. This isn't just an attack on people in Fort McMurray Cold Lake. This is an attack on energy workers that work in Calgary. Many people actually commute regularly from Calgary into the oil sands, whether it be in Fort McMurray, in Cold Lake, in Bonnyville. There's a lot of people that work throughout Alberta in the energy industry and live in Edmonton or Calgary, but specifically they live in Calgary. And I talk to many of them on a fairly regular basis. And this is one of the things that they find so frustrating is they find that this government, this Liberal government, led by Justin Trudeau, has passed his expiry date and doesn't seem to be interested in finding solutions and instead focuses on dividing Canadians. And so this motion here with the preamble that is such an affront on Alberta is just yet another proof point that this government isn't listening. And if they were really serious, they wouldn't have done point of order after point of order after point of order because they were upset that their preamble did in fact attack our province of Alberta. They would simply have tried to find some way of not doing it to begin with. But once you do it, you need to apologize and you need to make things better. And there has been none of that from your government, Mr. Chair, which is really sad for the people of Alberta. And I think this is one of these places where it is so incumbent on us as legislators to make sure that we are doing things and keeping in mind the words and the actions we use. And frankly, this is not something that I can support. This is not something that Conservatives can support. This is not something that Albertans support because this is a problem. And so until that preamble is removed in its entirety, there is no way we can actually have a fulsome, real conversation on the substance of this motion because the preamble attacks the very province that I come from, that you come from, Mr. Chair. And so as such, I'm going to cede the floor over to my colleagues, but I would urge every single person to vote against this motion. It is not a motion that's been put forward in good faith. And if it was put forward in good faith, I'm telling you right now, it's not being received in good faith, and therefore it needs to change. And so as that, I'm going to cede the floor. And I was just wondering, could you confirm what the speaking order is?
Yes, the next speaker is Ms. Jones, and then I have Mr. Patzer after that, and then Mr. Dreeshen. Thank you, Ms. Goodridge. We'll now go to Ms. Jones. Ms. Jones, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and it's absolutely a pleasure for me to speak on this motion today put forward by my colleague, MP De Bruzen, and I know it was amended by MP Simard, and we're happy to support the motion as amended. My colleague that just spoke, Ms. Goodridge, spoke as well last week, and there's a couple of things in her commentary that I really would like to address. First of all, whenever we bring a motion to the table, it's never about the preamble, it's about the actual motion. What we're voting on is the last stanza in the motion, which is what is calling for action. The rest of it is basically not as relevant. However, if she's offended by a comment, she should not be, because it's just stating very clearly the facts. And I want to run through that motion to start with, because I think it's important for people to understand the context in which this motion is being brought forward. First of all, if you remember, during the pandemic and subsequent to that, there was a lot of issues around the oil and gas sector and the impact upon companies, workers, and so on. So the government of Canada did a deal, I guess, with Alberta, or they did a deal to invest in the cleanup of abandoned and orphan wells in the region. In Alberta, it was identified as being a number of these wells up to 1,800 to 2,000. In Saskatchewan, it was identified as being a number of wells. That's why these two provinces are mentioned. They are the only two that received federal government money to do orphan and abandoned well cleanup, which is a responsibility of the provincial governments, not of the federal government. So first of all, that's why they are mentioned in the preamble. But again, the preamble is basically has no influence in terms of what the motion is. The motion itself is calling on the Standing Committee of Natural Resources to begin a 5-meeting study on the impact of the failure to clean these wells, the impacts of the pollution from not cleaning up abandoned orphan wells, the cost of cleaning up abandoned and orphan wells, the federal regulations to hold companies to account for well cleanup, and the potential opportunities associated with cleaning up abandoned wells, and report its findings to the House of Commons. That's the motion that's before the table. My friend seems to be hung up on the fact that two provinces are mentioned in the preamble. One is Alberta and one is Saskatchewan. Again, I reiterate, they are mentioned because they have the largest number of orphan abandoned wells. They also are the only provinces receiving federal government money. The motion itself is very clear, but the preamble does allude to the fact that Alberta sent back $137 million of federal government money that was provided to them to clean up these abandoned wells and create jobs during the pandemic. The whole idea was to reduce pollution, to reduce our environmental footprint, to clean up the orphan and abandoned wells, and to keep Albertans working and people in Saskatchewan, to keep them in jobs. The Alberta government made a choice that they did not want to spend this money. They did not want to clean up these 1,800 to 2,000 orphan and abandoned wells. And that's why they've returned the money. So the purpose of the study is to look at those wells, how important it is that they be cleaned up, how important it is that the right federal regulations be in place to hold these companies accountable, and look at what the opportunities are to cleaning up abandoned wells and report those findings back to the House of Commons. It's very simple. It's nothing complicated about any of this whatsoever. So I think my colleague is really bogged down with information that has absolutely nothing to do, but really just conceived at this point as a speaking point for herself. But you know, if she wants to see what a real attack on a province looks like, I'm going to give her an example of Bill C-49. I sat through this committee for over 2 months while the Conservative caucus filibustered Bill C-49. They used every ounce of time they could in this committee to bring forward fictitious motions and to make comments that had really no impact whatsoever on Bill C-49. It was an intentional means to filibuster the bill to hold Newfoundland and Labrador hostage to this committee and to the House of Commons simply because they did not want to pass this piece of legislation. Just like the Harper government before them, they did not believe that Newfoundland and Labrador should have any special agreement or rights when it come to oil and gas. They felt that obviously that Bill C-49 was going to afford this province once again an opportunity to earn royalties, create real jobs in clean offshore wind energy. And as a result of it, they held the bill hostage, and they held our province hostage, our workforce hostage. They held up big projects, and that, my friend, is what you call holding a province back. And that's exactly what the Conservative Party did. They held back the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, and they held back the province of Nova Scotia as it relates to wanting to lead clean offshore wind energy in their provinces. What we're doing today is supporting Alberta, supporting Saskatchewan, supporting a clean environment for Canadians, making sure that when we have abandoned wells that are left behind, that there is a mechanism to get those wells cleaned up, to reduce the amount of pollution in the environment, but also to create very important, well-paying jobs in these provinces. And no one should be offended by that. I can honestly tell you that there's tremendous support, especially on my side for Alberta, and especially for Fort McMurray, where I have many constituents who live and work in that province. I have family members, I have relatives, very close. I have a sister who lives out there. So, it's not about being offside with any province, and I take exception to her comments around that. That is not what the motion is asking for at all. The motion is very clear. I don't want to read it over and over, but I think anyone who can comprehend the language in the bill will see that it is not offensive to any province or territory, but rather it is a mechanism by which we make sure that abandoned wells, no matter what province they're in this case it happens to be in Alberta, can get cleaned up, and they can get done in a way that is very practical and engaging for the community. It allows businesses to make money. It allows workers to gain opportunities. It allows the province to be able to talk about the great work they're doing in cleaning up abandoned wells and creating a clean, fresh, new environment for other opportunities to be able to proceed. We see this as a win-win situation. But so I take great exception to that because I have a lot of time and a lot of support for the province of Alberta, just like I do for my own province and the other provinces and territories in the country. Anytime that we bring forward a motion like this, it is always with the best of intentions. It is never to determine or to signal out any particular region, any particular industry, or any particular province. Just like every single day in the government of Canada and in this country, there are debates around legislation, there are debates around projects, there are differences of opinion in how we move forward and what is best. But I think at the end of the day, collectively, our goal is the same, and that is to do the best that we can for Canadians. In this case, the government of Canada felt that orphan and abandoned wells, especially when you're looking at up to 2,000 of them in one particular region of the country, is something that we should be addressing as a government. And we stepped up to address that and very simply made the funding available so that when people were displaced, during the pandemic, they would have an opportunity to gather other employment, to have new well-paying jobs created in their economy that they could solicit and work in, and be able to bring stability to their own income and to their families and still contribute to their province. This is not a bad thing. These wells, to clean them up, we know it's going to cost over $200 million. And why the provincial government in Alberta would return $137 million to the federal government without creating those jobs in their own province for their own people, without even putting these contracts out to tender for local companies to do the work. They were satisfied to allow up to 2,000 abandoned and orphan wells to just continue to exist, continue to cause pollution in the economy and in the environment. We know that it's having a negative impact, and any scientists or studies that have been done on an orphan and abandoned wells will certainly substantiate that information. So really, the motion is simple. It's very clear. And in my opinion, it's the smart thing to do. So I also want to address a couple of other comments that came up. And, obviously one was with regard to, the Alberta piece. So I hope I've been able to clarify that. This has nothing to do with the province of Alberta in terms of giving them a black mark. It has everything to do with giving them a hands up, giving them some assistance on cleaning up orphan and abandoned wells, which is the right thing to do in Canada, providing them money to create jobs in their local and community, to give businesses and contractors opportunities that they didn't have. But again, it comes back, I think, to the overarching message that Conservatives refuse to believe in doing anything that is helpful for the environment. They refuse to accept that we are in an environmental crisis. They refuse to accept that reducing pollution is the way forward to a clean economy and to a better world for all of us, and certainly a better Canada. So they only have to look in their own province and see what happened in Jasper last year to know that climate change is real, and it is impacting our communities in a very real way. When you look at the fact that more than nearly 340 structures were lost in Jasper in that fire, including people's homes, businesses, bridges, roads, other pieces of infrastructure, this is very serious environmental damage that is occurring because of climate pressure. And if we don't accept that that is real and start drastically making more changes in society, we're going to see a lot more of it. So when I look at the fact that in Canada in 2023, we had 15 million hectares of land destroyed by fire in the environment. This affects animals, plants, communities, people, homes, everything of that nature. Normally in Canada, we would have had fires that would have destroyed probably about 2 million hectares a year on average. To go to 15 million hectares is huge. It's one of the largest. It is the largest in Canada, and it's a trend that we don't want to see continue. But we're also seeing it in other parts of the province, just not in Alberta, but Alberta has had their share of wildfires. And even their firefighters are saying that these fires are different. They're more rapid, they're more aggressive. They require specific and specialized training. They require a response that is not been seen in the past when it comes to these kinds of wildfires. And the experts who are out there in the field fighting these fires are the people that are saying that. That's why in Canada we want to set up the fire training facility of excellence to train firefighters across Canada so that they are able to deal with specialized situations and changing and aggressive wildfires that we're seeing today. So they don't have to look far to know that capping orphan and abandoned wells is a critical part of our response to reducing pollution, to protecting the environment, and to try and avoid major wildfires like we've seen in Jasper this year. Even in my own riding this year, I've had 2 communities evacuated, up to 10,000 people at a time. When you live in the north, it's even more complicated. You don't always have a road out, and if you have a road out, it's usually one road out. And that causes serious life and death situations in many communities. Just think in Canada today, when we are evacuating some of these communities, we're having to do it by air. In my own riding, we evacuated hospitals, long-term care facilities in the middle of the night by aircraft to the nearest other hospitals and facilities. This is what Canadians are dealing with every single day in this country, whether it be floods, fires, or whatever, or major storms. This is what we're dealing with. And we believe firmly, as do the world, except for conservatives, that this is very much instigated by changes in the environment. And we know that our job is to try in every way possible to reduce pollution without having major impacts on the lives of Canadians. And I know we're not always going to agree on how we do that, but surely we can agree that when the government of Canada gives a province the money to clean up abandoned and orphan wells that are causing pollution as a means of making the environment a cleaner, more pristine place, and create jobs for people, then they at least step up to try and do that. So I'd like to make sure that that is on the record and that people understand that there is a real reason behind doing this. It's partly to create jobs and to give businesses new opportunities, but the huge part of this is the environment as well, and cleaning the environment and making sure that we have the resources and the potential available for people that they know that they need. So, Mr. Chair, I'm hoping that the motion will pass. I hope that members opposite will see that there's value and importance in this and not get caught up in the fact that Alberta has signaled out. The reality is that Alberta does have these numbers of abandoned and orphan wells. And the reality is the government of Canada is giving you a check to deal with it, to create jobs, to give businesses more opportunity, and to clean up these orphan and abandoned wells. And no one should take offense to it. It is a good program for Alberta, just like it was a good program for Saskatchewan. And we want to make sure that it gets implemented and done properly. I'm asking my colleagues today, we don't need to belabor this issue. It's very, very simple. The writing is very clear, And I would ask that they would support this motion so that we can pass it and move on to the study in committee, where every member will have the opportunity to make whatever points that they want to make around this motion, whether they support it or they're against it. They will have the opportunity to lay that out in the committee and to make their points. But as it is right now, the Government of Canada stands by Alberta. It stands by our policies on the environment. We know that climate change is real. We know that doing the right thing is the way forward. This is the right thing, including Alberta, supporting Alberta financially, giving Albertans jobs, giving businesses in Alberta a new opportunity for contracts, and at the same time in reducing pollution is a way forward for all of us. It's a win-win, and I would ask all members of the committee to support the motion put forward by MP DeBruzen.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. We'll now go to Mr. Patzer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just for ultimate clarity here for everyone, we're on the main motion now. Do I understand that correctly? Yeah, amended motion, as we voted in favor of Mario's amendment last meeting, correct? But the amended body of the main motion is where we're at, right? Okay, thank you very much.
Correct, Mr. Patzer. The original motion was brought forward by Mr. Bruson, was further amended by Monsieur Samad, and we are now on the amended main motion.
Could I interest you in just reading it out for any of the viewers who are watching, just so people who are watching would know what exactly it is that we are on?
Would you like me to read it out, or the clerk?
Yeah,
or
no, I'd
would
like you to read it out. You're the
Well,
chair.
I don't have. I can ask the clerk to have the
Sure.
official copy read out if you'd like.
That would be fantastic.
Just for clarity, Mr. Clerk, would you be able to do that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. As suggested, we are debating the adjourned, well, now we're resuming debate on the motion, Mr. Bruson, pardon me, which has been amended. It reads in English, given that there are 1,600 abandoned and orphaned oil wells in Alberta, polluting farmland, waterways, and air, the number of abandoned wells in Alberta are set to increase by an additional 1,800 to 2,000. These additional abandoned wells will cost more than $200 million to clean up. The government of Alberta sent back $137 million because they failed to use the funds provided by the government of Canada to clean up the abandoned wells and create jobs in the pandemic. The government of Saskatchewan used their allocated funds in their entirety to clean abandoned wells and create jobs. Companies who abandon wells and fail to pay for their cleanup negatively impact provincial taxpayers and municipalities. Orphaned and abandoned wells present an economic opportunity to support energy solutions like geothermal energy. The Standing Committee on Natural Resources began a 5-meeting study on the impact of this failure to clean these wells, the impacts of the pollution from not cleaning up abandoned and orphaned wells, the costs of cleaning up abandoned and orphaned wells, the federal regulations to hold companies to account for well cleanup, and the potential opportunities associated with cleaning up abandoned wells, and report its findings to the House of Commons.
Yes, thank you very much. I think that helps provide a little bit of clarity to anybody who might be listening to this debate to know what exactly it is that we are doing here. One thing I find interesting about all of this, it's actually a recommended practice in the big green book that we all have to not include preamble on motions. Reason being that when there's a report table in the House of Commons, that gives you an opportunity to speak to whatever that would be that you want to say that is relevant to it. So it is actually it's a recommendation to not provide preamble on motions for this very reason. So therefore, we could avoid motions being politicized per se. It also helps to make sure that there's accurate or there's real facts that are part of these motions when they get moved. And I think it's important to note that the Alberta Energy Regulator, of course, would have been the natural place to go and look for the correct data set and information on what the situation is like in the province of Alberta with abandoned and orphaned oil wells. It's also worth noting that if you go to the Alberta Energy Regulator's website, there's a very thorough description of what an abandoned well is and what an orphaned well is. So I think that for certainty and clarity, it is important to note that there is actually a very strict process that it's already in place around what the process is for abandoning a well. And I think when we were, as a committee, well, we saw the minister's response from the province of Alberta, and I'm just going to read from his statement from September 27th again. That
Mr. Patzer, we have a point of order, so I'm going to ask you to hold. Go ahead, Mr. Bruson.
I'm just trying to clarify if the member opposite is suggesting witnesses who we should be calling to speak to this study, which I'm sure we would all be happy to hear from the Alberta Energy Regulator. They're interested in speaking to this point. Or is he arguing whether we should do this study about how we can support communities in this issue of how they deal with abandoned wells? And how what the regulations are, and also what are the
That's debate, Chair.
opportunities. So maybe it's more a point of clarification, but I'm just trying to figure out, are we talking right now about witness suggestions, or are we talking about whether there's any value in doing a study about abandoned wells at all?
Thank you, Mr. Bruson. I think Mr. Patzer, through his debate, will look to clarify some of your comments for clarification. So, Mr. Patzer, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Yeah, well, it's just getting started. So, I mean, I'm sure if she would allow me the time, that she would be able to have a listen and find out what exactly it is I'm about to say, and she can derive from that what she will. What I was getting at was being factual, making sure that if we're going to have motions before us, that they actually be based on fact, and that they be based on reason. So I'm going to go back to this minister's statement again here, just because I was just talking about the difference between abandoned wells and orphan wells. The motion being, this is the quote from the minister in Alberta. The motion being debated by the Standing Committee on Natural Resources earlier today was factually wrong and frankly nonsensical. It's extremely concerning that Liberal and New Democrat members of Parliament sitting on the Natural Resources Committee don't appear to understand what an abandoned well is. For their enlightenment, a properly abandoned well is a good thing. It means the well has been properly decommissioned and does not pose risk of polluting any land. You'd think that an MP sitting on this particular committee would know something about the industry they and their staff are supposed to monitor. So the reason why I read that, Mr. Chair, is when I was looking on the Alberta Energy Regulator's website, there is a process in place for how to decommission a well. There's also monitoring that is required for for an abandoned well to make sure that there are no leaks. And if there are leaks, then it is incumbent upon the company that is responsible for that well to make sure that there's a process in place to either stop the leak or to continue to monitor it if the levels are below of the regulated level of concern. So it's important to know that there is actually already a very strict process in place in Alberta for how to properly deal with an abandoned well. Now, the difference between an abandoned well and an orphan well, as you know, is that there is no longer a company for which the liabilities can be attached to with an orphan well. And as we know, the Orphan Well Association in the province of Alberta has done quite well at cleaning up their wells. They closed 622 sites in 2023-24 alone, which was up 44% from the year before. So when you look at what they are actually doing in that province, they are doing a good job to get on top of a very difficult situation, but it is one that the province is pushing very hard to make sure that it is properly taken care of. Now, beyond that, we've got the issue of jurisdiction. Obviously, natural resources development is provincial jurisdiction, and the provinces have their processes in place, as I just outlined, in regards to abandoned orphan wells and how to deal with them. So they are doing what they need to do on that. But when you look at the money that was allocated to the province of Alberta, they were given $1 billion, and every penny of it was allocated for cleanup. And I think it's important to note that the minister from Alberta did say, from the province of Alberta, that they had asked for an extension from the federal government to be able to get these wells cleaned up, to be able to spend the remaining monies, which was $137 million. Now, when they've asked for an extension, that means that they were told no. That means that the federal government didn't want them to spend that remaining $137 million because they didn't agree with the manner at which the province was looking to spend the money within their own jurisdiction, which was their right to do so. But I think it's very interesting to note as well that who they are looking to partner with to spend that $137 million was, I think it was Treaties 6, 7, and 8, or it might have been 7, 8, and 9. It's 6, 7, and 8. It was Treaties 6, 7, and 8 that they were looking to partner with to make sure that these abandoned wells and orphan wells could be cleaned up. I'm just going to read another quote from a letter that Treaty 7 First Nation Chiefs Association wrote to Minister Wilkinson. To date, First Nation contractors in the nations have successfully reclaimed over 1,600 well sites utilizing the FNSRP funds in a safe, responsible, and efficient manner. The transfer of the $134 million from Alberta to FNSRP is required to allow for a seamless continuation of these successes. So that's who they're looking to partner with, an organization that has the skill set, the labor force, and the knowledge to be able to properly go through this process. Now, I suppose the province of Alberta could have spent $137 million on a bunch of random contractors that don't necessarily have the knowledge, the skill set, or the wherewithal to get it done, or a track record of getting it done, which is something that we have continually seen this Liberal government do when it comes to many of the different spending scandals that we have seen come through, and none rings any truer than that of GC Strategies, who got hundreds of millions of dollars to be an IT company, ran out of a basement, and did actually no IT work, and that's just one of several scandals that has happened. I think that when the province is looking to find contractors of this kind of magnitude and success, you'd think that the federal government would actually listen to that proposal and would have been willing to enter into and accept the province's offer to have an extension to get it done. Particularly since it would be the federal government's responsibility to make sure that these wells would be cleaned up on First Nations land. But that fact is being ignored by this motion. And the fact that the province of Alberta was the one who was willing to work here to see that they would have funding available to clean up wells on their lands, I mean, says all that you need to know about the intent and the focus of this particular government. When we look at the preamble, because we heard a lot of talk about the preamble. I mentioned earlier that it's in the book of practices, it's recommended to not include a preamble in a motion. But I think when we look at the context of what is in it, it says a lot about the heart of this government. And division is all that I see in here, because we know that abandoned orphaned wells is not an Alberta problem. It's not a Saskatchewan problem. They exist all across this country. And if this was about the government taking the issue of abandoned wells and orphaned wells and their cleanup or their reclamation, seeing them done properly all throughout the industry, then of course the preamble would include mention of the fact that this is a lot more than just a Alberta issue. But what they've done is they're specifically pointing the finger at the province of Alberta. And I take great offense to that, because there are many people that are from Saskatchewan who work in Alberta. I've heard, we hear the joke regularly, and I've heard it said of a few different provinces from the Maritimes and from the Atlantic region. So I'll kind of generalize it, I guess. But it's that, the second largest city in Newfoundland is Fort McMurray. Now that's because of people from Newfoundland and also from other provinces in the Atlantic and Maritime regions regularly fly out there to work, and there's a great number of people working in Fort McMurray and area that are from other parts of this country. So I think it's important to note that this is an industry that supports workers across the country, but the issue of abandoned wells and orphan wells goes far beyond just the province of Alberta. And then to deliberately write in here well, Alberta didn't do this, but Saskatchewan did that. That's a way of pitting one province against another. The two provinces who just so happen to be the biggest energy producing provinces in the country. And I think that it's not proper for the government to do that. I think they should be focusing on ways that they can be productive in a way that would unite the country and productive in ways that would speak well of the industry that this committee is actually supposed to be working to support. And that is not what we are seeing from the preamble of this motion by the Liberals. Now, that's also why when our colleague from the Bloc Québécois proposed an amendment to include federal regulations in there, at least that brought a little bit of the scope of this motion into where it should lie, and that is actually into federal jurisdiction, federal regulations, and not meddling in the province's jurisdiction. And so I'm grateful that, at least my colleague from the Bloc is mindful of provincial jurisdiction and the important role that plays in the way our country operates. So, if the government was serious about trying to do something on this issue, then they would have made sure that the scope of it was actually proper. And in the preamble, they would have indicated that this was about dealing with a nationwide issue and not just trying to dump on one particular region of the country. Now, Mr. Chair, part of why we're here where we're at today is also that you still haven't provided this committee with a schedule for our work going forward. Now, the only way that I knew what we were up to today was based on the notice of meeting that was sent out by the clerk. Thank you, clerk, for that. But, Mr. Chair, it's been requested of you numerous times looking for clarity going forward and the way that we can best plan out what we are going to do as a committee. Now, it would be a lot simpler to be able to look at scheduling some of these motions that have been put on notice or that are being debated here today. It'd be better to have a sense of where and when we could fit these motions in if we actually knew what our schedule was. And that, Chair, is where your role comes into play. And I think that it would be incumbent upon you to distribute a schedule of what you have planned going forward for this committee, which is something that I have seen regularly from other committees. And in fact, when I was a member of this committee previously, that was a regular practice that the chair at the time undertook, was to make sure that there was a proper schedule sent out to all members so that we could focus on the work. Now, rather than jumping back and forth to all these different studies, and then the fact that we haven't even finished some reports and some other studies that we've almost gotten through, you could have those scheduled out, but you don't. You haven't bothered to put that in writing for us as a committee to see where we are at. So I think that would be a great place for you, Mr. Chair, to try and at least attempt to show some leadership of this committee, and that would go a long way to helping us be able to do our work. This is also why we proposed a motion trying to strike the preamble from an amendment, I guess, to strike the preamble from the motion, but to also indicate that this study shouldn't take place until after a carbon tax election where Canadians can have a say as to who's going to run this country going forward. Because based on the way things are going in the House of Commons these days, we know that this Parliament probably isn't long in time here yet. So we would even probably be able to finish the study anyway. So we may as well push it off until after the next election. And that was what we tried to do. But Chair, you ruled it out of order because you said we can't strike the preamble, even though it is a common practice listed in the Big Green Book that we shouldn't include preamble in these motions anyway. So if you could provide us a schedule, Chair, that would be very helpful. We heard the member opposite talk about how the preamble isn't relevant. Well, if it's not relevant, then why was it included in the first place? For what I had just said about the preamble not being required, you think that the government would have accepted our amendment to strike the preamble if it's not relevant. Now, if it's also not relevant, then why would you use it deliberately as wording? Why would the government use it deliberately as wording to deliberately slag on one of the provinces of our country? That's very clear. The government has made it very clear what their intent is, and their intent is to point fingers at the province of Alberta to try to pit one region against the other, which is something that they have continually done for over 9 years in government. And we are continuing to see that from them with this motion. So I would like them to be serious, and I'd like them to take to consideration the fact that Canadians have pretty firmly let it be known to this government that they're tired of their divisive tactics, and they are looking for some unity, and they're looking for some knowledge, at least, on some of the topics that we're talking about here. Because, I mean, if the parliamentary secretary knew a little bit about what was going on in natural resources, she would know that the preamble isn't even based on facts and not based on relevance. So I think that would go a long way as well. The preamble would have given her a chance to show that she actually knows what's going on in the industry, but that's been made abundantly clear here with the misinformation that's in here. So I think, Mr. Chair, another point I want to just talk about briefly is it was talked about Jasper and what happened in Jasper. Now, I think it's important to note for viewers that both the current Environment Minister and former Environment Minister Catherine McKenna were both told that the forests in and around Jasper, within Jasper National Park, were a tinderbox waiting to ignite. So that was something the warning was given a long time ago. And actually, my colleague who opened the meeting from Fort McMurray Cold Lake, I believe it was her, it was a member from Yellowhead. Sorry, it was a member from Yellowhead's predecessor who had spoken about this particular issue on this committee and in the House of Commons about a decade ago already. And he warned this government that the conditions were ripe for the forest to ignite around the town site of Jasper and for this type of destruction to occur. The member at the time mentioned that, and both ministers, the current one and the former one, were warned. They were notified that this was a problem, that they needed to deal with it. And Catherine McKenna was asked to come to committee to testify at the Environment Committee about what she knew about the briefings that she had received on this, and she has said no. Now, if she was so confident in her decision to ignore the warnings that were coming from both inside and outside, then you'd think she'd be able to come and confidently speak about that as her time as minister, but she refuses to do so, because she knows that she was wrong to ignore the warnings that were coming to her, both from the opposition but also from government officials. And then for them to try to equate abandoned wells and orphaned wells to the reason why the town site of Jasper burned to the ground is absolutely ludicrous, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chair. That's just absolutely ridiculous, and it's quite embarrassing for Canadians and for people who live in Jasper that the government would go to that level to try to say that was the reason why it happened, when we know, based on emails that have been made public, that it's abundantly clear that this government deliberately chose to do nothing because of political optics on what would happen if they actually took serious the job of making sure that our forests were properly managed. And I was on this committee previously when we talked to some people within the forestry industry, and one of the number one issues that they brought up a couple years ago was cleaning up the dead wood that's fallen on the forest floor and all the undergrowth that's in there. That was something that they had warned us in this committee, this very committee, just a couple of short years ago, Mr. Chair, and nothing has been done by the government to do that. Now, the member opposite also talked about letting the experts do their job. Well, the experts trying to do their job were firefighters when it came time to put out the fire, and Parks Canada wouldn't let the firefighters enter in the town site to do their job. So what more? How can we for her to talk about letting experts do their job when they literally wouldn't let the experts do their job is absolutely appalling. And to let the town site burn the way that they did by not letting firefighters in is absolutely ridiculous. So it's important to make sure that we have that record straight. Now, the other thing that she was talking about was, well, conservatives were the ones who were pointing fingers at her province and her region with Bill C-49. Well, obviously, she didn't quite catch the drift of what we were talking about on C-49, Mr. Chair, because Bill, at the time, C-49 had no less than 37 direct references to the unconstitutional parts of the Impact Assessment Act. And we firmly believed, and there were many experts within the industry and people in our own province who also agreed that making sure that there was regulatory certainty was of utmost importance. Now, C-49 was the modernization of the Atlantic Accord, which Conservatives supported. However, what we didn't support was the inclusion of the Unconstitutional Impact Assessment Act. And at the time that we were debating it here in this committee, the government had done nothing to change that, and they had given no indication as to when they would do it, other than to say, well, later, at a later date, we will get to it. And it wasn't until the budget came through, the Budget Implementation Act, that we finally saw the government take action on changes to the Impact Assessment Act. But Mr. Chair, I would assume that you would know this, being that you yourself are from Alberta, but the province of Alberta has once again told the government that they are going to be seeking legal action against the federal government because they do believe the Impact Assessment Act is still unconstitutional, and that there are still some outstanding issues around standing, around ministerial discretion, things like that, amongst other things that are still unconstitutional because they were part of what was ruled unconstitutional before and still haven't been changed. So if the member opposite would be concerned about what's happening in her province, and she would want to have absolute certainty in the Impact Assessment Act and not have an unconstitutional element to it still going forward. So that's something that we wanted to have addressed at that particular time. It's still something that we want to have addressed today when it comes time to the Impact Assessment Act. And in the study that we were just previously on, Mr. Chair, you'll remember that we had multiple witnesses come to this committee and once again tell us that there are still outstanding issues with the Impact Assessment Act, and there is no indication that this government is going to take that serious and seek to have that uncertainty dealt with and resolved, so that way private business can have absolute certainty going forward for the next project that wants to be built. Because we know that there is a need and demand for more pipelines to be built in this country. We're going to be at capacity by 2028, and there will be a need for more export capacity in this country. So there's a lot of things going on here that I think need to be ultimately addressed. And kind of getting back to a different point, Mr. Chair, that's where the schedule would be helpful with this committee, so that we know where we're at with these things. That way we know when our next meeting is going to be on the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion. I know that's what it says on the screen that we're debating today, but that's not what we're debating today. We're actually debating a motion that has to deal with orphaned and abandoned wells. But so, Mr. Chair, I think that is about where I'm going to wrap up my remarks at this particular point in time. And I know that my colleague from Alberta, Mr. Dreeshen, will have lots to say as well. I look forward to hearing from somebody who's actually from Alberta talk about what's happening in his province on this issue, and not somebody from downtown Toronto, as the parliamentary secretary is.
Thank you, Mr. Patzer. Before I go to you, Mr. Dreeshen, I just want to clarify one point. Mr. Patzer, that you had stated that the preamble, the point of discussion previously when we had brought forward on the preamble being amended, changed or deleted, you could not do so because we had a motion on the floor by Monsieur Simard. We had an amendment, on the floor of Monsieur Simard to the main motion. So at that time, it could not have been amended at that time. So I just want to make sure you're aware, and that is clarified. The preamble can be, as I'd been advised by the clerk, can be done so because it's been stated a number of times, I think by the previous speaker. Ms. Goodrich may have referenced that, but I know you just did through your intervention. So I just wanted to clarify that so you understand that that could be done and that members are aware of that. Okay, so now I will go to Mr. Dreeshen. Mr. Dreeshen, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I had a few comments on this particular motion previous. And I know, as you were mentioning, that the preamble is something that maybe shouldn't be there. Of course, we've had others that say, well, all we're doing is trying to set the stage. So there are a few points that I have to do on the preamble, because if you go to the main motion, and I'll just go to that part that was presented in the main motion. It says, the Standing Committee of Natural Resources begin a 5-meeting study on the impact of this failure. So which failure are we speaking of? To clean up these wells. We did have at least a recognition that if we are dealing with national issues, that it should be the whole country rather than just in Alberta. So we did cancel that off. And the impact of pollution of not cleaning up abandoned and orphan wells. And of course, we did have that discussion with Mr. Patzer a moment ago about the difference between abandoned wells, which are at that stage because they are safe. And so, but they, I mean, they're still on the books, but they are safe at that point, versus the potential with orphaned wells because they may or may not be safe. And so this is the aspect that is there. However, again, going back to the preamble, it doesn't say that. It says that there are 1,600 abandoned and orphaned wells in Alberta, and they are polluting farmland, waterways, and air. So there's an inaccuracy that is there. And of course, that then becomes part of the actual motion. So people get the idea that there's something extremely wrong taking place, but that certainly isn't the way that it is. And then they discuss the regulations to hold companies to account for well cleanup. That's already there. That's what the Alberta Energy Resources Regulatory Group is for. And the potential opportunities associated with cleaning up abandoned wells and reporting its finding to the House. When I look at that, about the one thing that is significant is the opportunity for cleaning up abandoned wells and the kinds of other things that can be done. I mean, there's different choices as to how you're going to deal with that. Are you just going to close them in, or are you going to use them, so that you can sequester carbon and then maybe try and regenerate and rejuvenate the pools that are there? So that is certainly a discussion that has some merit. And again, if you can't understand or you don't understand what abandoned wells and orphaned wells are, then one is demonizing everything that is taking place. There is the other aspect, and this is what I really want to dwell on today. It says that the government of Alberta sent back $137 million. I think it's 136, but that's beside the point, because they failed to use the funds provided by the Government of Canada to clean up abandoned wells and to create jobs in the pandemic. So again, a statement that maybe numerically has some sense. However, it doesn't address the true facts. And this is what I presented last day, which is those dollars that were being discussed, of course, were to have been spent on First Nations land. And rather than simply saying, well, we'll just get anybody to come in there and reclaim it, the Alberta government worked extremely closely with First Nations so that they could take on that responsibility. Now, of course, it does take a little bit of time to make that happen.
Yeah, I told you.
And therefore, it became an issue. So one could have said, all right, we can find some of the other companies that have been doing the rest of it. We can put them into the First Nations and we can push them aside. But two things. First of all, that isn't how we do things there. And secondly, it's on federal land. I mean, it's a fact. It's not something that, and I know that people are not overly proud of it, but it's a responsibility that the federal government should be dealing with. And then you take a look at, the actual numbers. It's $133.3 million that was to have been spent out of the 137. So I guess if you wanted to be nitpicky, there's perhaps maybe $3 million that would have been in the fund that the Alberta government could have then maybe cleaned up 2 wells or something like that with it. But that's being pretty nitpicky. So here you have this government trying to make a point of irresponsibility by the provincial government, and it all says that, it goes through, it lays that out constantly in every one of the preambles and in the actual motion, even though we tried to change it a bit. And with yourself, Mr. Chair, being able to, present Mr. Chair, being able to make the change in that motion. So we have all of that, but zero recognition for the fact that this government knew that this $137 million was allocated to clean up on First Nations. That in no way, shape, or form has come into any of this motion. The only reason it comes in is because we know that
Oui, Madame de Bruzen.
C'est juste pour un point de clarification parce que
Well, just one point. I've never seen a situation where members of a committee want to discuss or dispute in a motion without actually adopting the motion. Well, I think that perhaps I don't see their point in discussing this. If we were to clarify this, then we can have experts come in and share their knowledge and their opinions, and we'll know much more about what we should know about this situation. The clerk is telling me that it's a debate at this time. We're just on debate, and I find it significant that we could come back to that point. But I would invite my colleague Earl to continue.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Appreciate that. I think we don't see it in the preamble either, or in the main motion, that it talks about any recognition of what that money was, what it was allocated for. And I think that is significant because, of course, that would indicate that maybe this government isn't paying attention to that, or maybe they just felt that, taking this blunt instrument and hitting Alberta with it would be the thing to do at this particular point in time, failing to understand that really, and I do agree on this part, if we were to bring in the experts, they would make this government look ridiculous because of the fact that they are not paying attention to this. So there is that fact. And probably, we all get a chance to vote on whether or not we want to bring experts in to make this government look ridiculous. I don't think it'll be a problem. However, here's where the problem lies. We have all of the misinformation that is being presented by the government. We have a lack of acknowledgement of where this comes from. But that isn't going to change. I mean, we've heard the comments this morning in the discussion and previously as to why they think this is such a great idea. So that isn't going to change them. That isn't going to change the people that they will come in to talk and the witnesses. I'm sure they're great witnesses, but they'll talk about something that's completely unrelated to the $137 million. But that's not the point. The point is throw this into the mix and see where we go from there. So I really want to go back to, again, the actual main motion part, and I'll come back to what First Nations were asking for and hoping for. But it says the Standing Committee of Natural Resources begins to study impact of this failure. So that's why they have to keep a preamble in, because what this failure are they speaking of? And to clean up these wells, so therefore they have to say, well, no, we don't care about all the abandoned and orphan wells all over the country. It's just this because, of course, you know, there was some dollars associated with it, which is an argument. But that's it. So, and again, we had previously, with the Mr. Simard, had taken away the in Alberta part to try and make it a pan-Canadian argument, at least. But again, they still speak to the impacts of the pollution of not cleaning up abandoned and orphan wells, which my colleague, Mr. Patzer, so eloquently described as the difference. Now, yes, if people don't know that, maybe that, again, is a good thing for us to understand. It's 5 meetings to deal with this. We could maybe look at the AER's reports. We could maybe have the government of Alberta, present something to the to this committee. 5 meetings about how the government doesn't know that it has a responsibility for First Nations. Some days I think I wouldn't mind pointing it out for that length of time, but I think it's kind of obvious just in the fact that it was presented this way, and certainly after, to be perfectly honest, after we had the discussion last week, I believe, on this, I honestly felt we were going to come here and the government was going to say, maybe this motion isn't that important after all. Maybe we should just take this off because we are going to look so stupid if we push this thing forward. But that was not the case, and here we are, taking a look at this in that way. Companies who abandon wells and fail to pay for their cleanup negatively impacts provincial taxpayers and municipalities. That is true. But there are processes in place that deal with that. They always have. And to hear, as Ms. Jones had mentioned earlier, well, how do you expect Alberta, they don't have a track record of environmentalism and so on. That is so much nonsense. I've mentioned before, and Ms. Goodrich was here earlier, or speaking earlier about this. When you go to Fort McMurray and you take a look at the construction site, the mining site that is there, and then you turn 180 degrees around and you look at the forest that is there, and you think, boy, wasn't this... Look what they're doing. They're taking these terrible forests and they're digging them up. No, they're digging them up and making them then into beautiful forests. There's a 40-year responsibility of the companies before their responsibility is released. After 20 years, and I've been up there, after 20 years, you can't tell the difference. There are no scars. There's nothing like that. It is an amazing type of technology to help in the removal of the natural oil spill, that is the oil sands, in preventing it to get to the rivers. I mean, that's the reality of it. But the point is, that's what reclamation is. And, I know that my good friend, Mr. Angus, has spoken a lot about mining sites. Well, that's what this is. It's a mining site. And if you can find a way of reclaiming it, then you would think that the people there should stand up and be proud of it. And I'm sure that in mining, whether it's in Ontario, Quebec, or in the Maritimes, wherever, that they are proud of those where they can make that difference. But Albertans are proud of that, of what they do and the difference that they make. They are also, we could go down the list of things that we excel at a worldwide level. And I harken back to when I first got involved in this and in politics, which is now just a little over 16 years ago. And one of the guys came to me and he said, don't let anybody tell you that there's anything wrong with Canada's oil and gas industry. The only people that come close to the environmental record of Canadian oil and gas is Australia. And the only reason they are is because they are implementing the processes that Alberta has. So that's what we're dealing with here. And so when we talk about the great technology, the opportunities to sell this around the world, what we've been met with this government is, well, we don't really want to do that. We don't want oil and gas development. If there's any way that we can stop that, the world is going this way. We hear this from the minister, and we hear this from other folks that have something to say on the issue. But that too is nonsense. All that does is takes the hundreds of billions of dollars of potential investment and puts it into other countries. And I was just speaking with a gentleman that does business around the world, and they're frustrated, but their next project is going to be in Kazakhstan. There's going to be oil coming out of there. Could have been it is a Canadian company, but it could have been done by Canadian workers. It could have been done so that the tax dollars go to the federal government, the provincial government, the municipal governments. That could have been it. But our mindset is, oh no, well, the only thing we want to have in the future are windmills and solar panels, and that's how we will create that intermittent power that we need. And then, I've heard people say, but once we've developed this massive battery storage concept, then we'll be able to deal with that. In the meantime, the rest of the world, even if they think that that's what they want to do, even if they believe that having, those particular types of renewables is a good idea, they're still using their oil and gas. They are cranking it up. In other countries, they are still using their coal. They're cranking it up. And the reason is because they know that's how they can manufacture. They know that's how they can get things done. They know that's how they can compete against people such as ourselves that have handcuffed our industries. And they just run over us. So, of course, when we say, why don't we think about where the future is going to be, we can get where people believe that one should be or could be in decades from now by becoming more efficient and everything else. But in the meantime, us shutting our industry down, which is, this is just one shot at across the bow. I mean, we see this constantly. But us shutting our industry down is simply going to mean that the rest of the world is going to take up the slack. And, I sometimes think about eventual failures of governments, eventual failures of nations, eventual failures of economic systems. And if we lose control over our natural resources, and some other country says, you know what, well, we'll take over. Right now, it's simply as investment, so there's competition, at least. But if you have no more control, and you think, oh, well, now we'll just stand back and we'll have another motion at some committee meeting to say, oh, that's not a good idea. Well, we won't be able to control that. And I think that's one of the main issues. So I'd like just now to go back to the First Nations Rehabilitation Program. And this report came from January 29th of this year. So basically what they're talking about, and I'll read some of it, says Government of Alberta developed the liability management framework to mitigate the risk associated with aging infrastructure and site rehabilitation. And with this, they had confirmed funding to First Nations and Métis communities. And there is a list. I'm not going to go through all of it because I know that there are other comments that others would like to make. But they go through all of the different First Nations and the value of the projects for those communities. One close to myself is Ermiskins Cree, $2.6 million for that community. Louis Bull, 1.7 million. So these are just some of the ones that are close. Sunchild, 1.2 million. And this goes through where these many millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars, are going to be spent. But the government chose, for political grandstanding, to pull that money out. And now they have to live with the fact that they pulled it out of First Nations communities. They have to live with the fact that First Nations, by the Alberta government's, with the Alberta government's assistance, were trying to build up their capability and to be able to manage these wells and the cleanups on their land. First Nations did not wish to be shell companies where somebody simply says, oh, I think we can check off a box that says that we have a First Nations running this, and then have others come in and reap the benefits. That's not what First Nations in my province do. It's not what other First Nations, because I spent many years on Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development over my time here. That's not what they do. They look after themselves and and what is needed there. They don't allow a government to come in and say, oh, we need to check off a box that says that we have First Nations participation. And I think you're starting to see that now when the discussions are coming place. And if not, I tell you that my discussions that I have had with First Nations financial organizations, they are livid. The fact that they are being shifted on this simply for this government to check off a box to say, oh yeah, we had this First Nations working with us. So that's not what's happening in Alberta, because there is a respect for the industriousness of First Nations people certainly in my province. And I think that's very, very critical. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to kind of just close in this, but I do just want to leave us with some of this information, especially when I'm speaking about the First Nations. And this is the Treaty 8 First Nations of Alberta Office of the Grand Chief. And this was December of last year, to the Honourable Minister Wilkinson. And it says, on December 11th, 2023, the chiefs of Treaty 6, 7, and 8 met to discuss the First Nations Site Rehabilitation Program and the $134 million site rehabilitation money unspent by the Alberta government, and the request of the Government of Canada for these dollars to be returned to savings instead of being invested to achieve their intended purposes. The same group of chiefs have unanimously signed the same group of chiefs have unanimously agreed that the federal government should allow the $134 million FSRP monies that the province currently holds to be placed into the FNSR program, providing much needed funds to continue the successful work that has been accomplished by us. So they're already working. It's not like it's ground one, that they're ground zero that we're sorting this up. If we continue status quo, both the provincial government, the federal government, and industry will be leaving over 3,000 sites to be abandoned or reclaimed on First Nations lands and territories. 3,000. You could maybe take a look at what the preamble says. Okay? But I mean, this is what they are talking about. And if if the chiefs that sat down and talked with me in my office got a chance to explain what they think of this government and its heavy-handed approach, that might be a very interesting meeting, but it's going to be an embarrassment for this government. And as I said, there's still time. They could change, get rid of the preamble, talk about just the learning something about what abandoned and orphan wells are about. And if that's all it said, I think it would be a much easier plan. And then maybe, we probably would point it out anyway, but maybe this government wouldn't be so embarrassed for the actions that it is placing on the table. If they are simply trying to set up some narrative for the during the carbon tax election, say, well, look at what we tried to do and these guys didn't care. That's what their thoughts are. Well, I guess that's to be debated at another time. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dreeshen. We'll now go to our next speaker, Mr. Falk. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank my colleagues, Mr. Patzer and Mr. Dreeshen, for their, and Ms. Goodrich for their phenomenal job on explaining the situation that we have here before us. And so I want to talk to the amended motion and just highlight a few things. I find it very disingenuous for a Toronto member of Parliament to put forward a motion.
Point of order.
We have a point of order from Mr. Angus. Mr. Angus, go ahead on the point of order.
Yeah, I've sat very politely and listened to the snowflakes going on about how mean we are to Alberta when we're talking about federal money being spent. But I've also seen how they can't have this conversation while continually denigrating people from other regions. If they don't like the motion, they can vote against the motion. But these cheap attacks on parliamentarians who are doing a job about federal money. They may not like that federal money is being considered accountable, but federal money is accountable. And that's the role of our committee. And I ask you, Chair, to ask these members to stop with these cheap personal attacks against colleagues.
Thank you. Mr. Angus, for your point of order. Colleagues, I think this is a good time to remind all colleagues to focus on your debate and not targeting other colleagues across around the table here. Please try to focus your debate as to the motion, to the amended motion on hand, so we can have a productive conversation on how to proceed with that motion and the benefits of it, or if you don't believe there's benefits of it. But so thank you, and I'll go with that. And I see Ms. Goodrich online with your hand up. Are you on a point of order, Ms. Goodrich?
Yes. I appreciate Mr. Angus's point of order in some capacity, but it A, frankly, wasn't a point of order, and B, in doing his point of order, actually proceeded to name call Conservative members, which I think goes against the very spirit of this. And so I would ask for an apology for him who continues to just name call.
Thank you, Ms. Goodrich. If his point of order wasn't a point of order, then yours wasn't either, I guess. But look, colleagues.
Point of order. I did say special. Did I say special snowflakes or just snowflakes in general? Okay, good, because they're not special.
Mr. Angus, once again, colleagues, let's focus on the debate, on not any personal attacks on individuals or parties. I know there's a partisan stripes here around the table, but let's try to focus on the conversation on hand and debate the motion and the merits of the motion. Hope that clears the air and we can get focused back on the work that Canadians have sent us to do at this committee. So thank you. Mr. Falk, go ahead.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for those comments. And I think if the member from that represents Timmins, James Bay, would have listened to the entirety of my comments, he would have realized that there was context to what I was saying. By having a Liberal member of Parliament from Toronto make motions to have to do with Alberta, and then presenting a preamble in the motion that was very denigrating to the entire province of Alberta and the industry that they so proudly represent. And so I think that was inappropriate. It wasn't an attack on the thing. It was just to give geographical perspective from this motion and also to the impact of it.
Go ahead, Mr. Bruson, on a point of clarification.
I'm just wondering if the Conservative Party's point of view is that Toronto MPs do not have the strength or ability to speak about federal funding to provinces, and perhaps they might want to make sure that Torontonians know that that's their feeling about people from their city, from that city.
Thank you, Mr. Bruson. I'm sure my colleague, Mr. Falk, will get into further debate and explain his rationale for what he stated or what he intends to state. So thank you. I'll go back to you, Mr. Falk.
Good, thank you, Mr. Chair. And so the point I was going to make is that this Liberal government, throughout its entirety of this past nine years, has sought to cause division in Canada like I've never seen before in my lifetime coming from any other government. You know, instead of promoting nation-building projects and trying to create cohesiveness across our country on projects, this Prime Minister in particular, sought to divide Canadians on every single level, whether it's economically or culturally or geographically. They've sought to create division among Canadians instead of creating unity. And often this Prime Minister has said that division is the fact that we have diversity, it's our strength here in Canada. And I want to unequivocally say it's not the diversity that's our strength, it's our unity. That is the strength that we have here in Canada. And when we present things in such a fashion to take swipes at other provinces, I don't think that creates unity. I think that creates more division. But it seems to be a hallmark or a characteristic of this Liberal government. I think the information that's been presented in the preamble, and my issue is with the preamble. I have some issues with the actual motion, with some of the wording in there as well, but my issue primarily is with the preamble. I don't think it's necessary to be there. I think we've heard from previous speakers that, in fact, it's recommended preambles not be included in motions. And I think precisely for the reason that we're experiencing here at committee is it actually creates problems and creates points of debate when we're actually not even debating the motion itself, but we're debating the preamble. So often the easiest is just to remove it, and there's been an unwillingness on the part of the parliamentary secretary of the Liberals there to do that. And so in the absence of that, then let's talk about it. Let's talk about the accuracy of the information that she's providing in the preamble. And she makes a comment on the very first bullet point that these abandoned and orphaned wells in Alberta, well, abandoned and orphaned are two different things. And I don't know if on the other side of this committee room, whether individuals understand the difference between abandoned and orphaned wells. And the comment later in that bulletin point says that they're polluting farmlands, waterways, and air. Well, then we don't really understand what an abandoned or an orphaned well is. And the interesting thing is it's just a comment made. And one thing I've learned in my 9 years as a parliamentarian is just because a Liberal says something is so doesn't mean that it is so. So just because the comment is made that...
Mr. Bruson, there is no point of clarification. Yes, so in a point of order, you can use a point of order if there's a point of order. But if there is clarification required, that's something... that one can ask in their debate to get clarification. But if it is a point of order, I'm happy to, you can say it's a point of order and we can go from
I do have a point of order because in the first case, I don't believe I've heard a motion from the members opposite seeking to amend the motion that we have here. So they've been just talking for a very long time, kind of in the blue, speaking, I guess, to the witness list that they would like. So I guess that was my first piece, but also I would be curious as to whether they're actually taking the position that we should not be studying the impact of these orphaned wells. Because I'm curious about that. That seems to be something up in the air.
Thank you. I'm not sure, Mr. Bruson, if that is a point of order, but there is a number of questions you've posed there that the member may get to, or the member may be bringing something forward through an amendment at some point. So we'll listen intently to hear from the member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll try and collect my thoughts again as to where I was going. It's the second or third interruption by way of point of order. But I was just saying that just because a Liberal says something is so doesn't mean that it is so. And the comment is made that these abandoned and orphaned wells are polluting farmland, waterways, and air. Well, there's no evidence to suggest that that's actually happening. And so just to make a comment randomly out of the blue, to me, it's a comment or it's a point that's made just to create agitation, which it obviously does. We shouldn't, I don't think, include things in our preamble that are intentionally put there to agitate people. I don't think it's helpful and useful for constructive debate and study for preamble to start off from the perspective of agitating someone. But I think if there's a legitimate concern, something that's well documented, I think that those are the things that we should be talking about. And regardless, it doesn't need to be in the preamble, it could be in the actual motion itself. So if we look at the difference between an abandoned and an orphaned well, we can see that abandoned wells actually have lifetime liability for contamination to the environment by the proponent. And the company continues, the company that owns them has a 25-year liability for surface reclamation issues. So if there's issues to do with topography, vegetation, soil texture, or drainage, those are things that the proponent of a well is responsible for 25 years following the abandonment of that well. And in fact, actually has lifetime liability for that well, creating any contamination. And you know what? It's something I think the industry has taken very seriously. The Alberta Energy Regulator monitors these abandoned wells very carefully and makes sure that that the owners of the well are actually doing their due diligence and that they're actually maintaining their responsibility and reducing the liability to our environment. I also find it very interesting that to a Liberal, a scandal is when somebody repays the federal government. And in this case, the Alberta government has paid the federal government $137 million. I find it interesting that what they don't think is a scandal is when there's $400 million in the Sustainable Development Technology Canada program that's been misappropriated. But they don't seem to think that that's a scandal. And in fact, the House has been seized for the better part of the last 3 weeks, debating exactly that issue, whether documents related to the SDTC scandal, their board of directors, the misappropriation of funds, the 186 conflicts of interest that existed, whether those should not be turned over to the RCMP because it certainly reeks of corruption. And the Liberals, for whatever reason, aren't seized with the scandalous nature of that particular occurrence, but they seem to be seized with $137 million that's returned to the federal government. Wow, talk about thinking backwards. But let's talk about that $137 million. The government of Alberta was given approximately $1 billion, which was to be spent in the cleanup, the reclamation, the proper decommissioning of abandoned and orphaned wells. And in the time frame that was allotted to them, was not able to complete the expenditures of the full $1 billion and had asked the federal government for an extension that they would be able to use the $137 million that had remained unspent. The federal government, this Liberal government, Liberal-controlled bureaucracy, said no, send us the money, send us $137 million. And so because the Alberta government could not responsibly, from a good stewardship perspective, spend the money to achieve the results that it was supposed to achieve, sent the money back to the federal government. And instead of commending Alberta for being good stewards of the money, they now want to conduct a study. Find out, why did you give $137 million back? Why didn't you spend it? Well, you know what? I think we should be commending provinces that are good stewards of money and that can't responsibly spend money to do it in a way that they know that they can stand behind the results that they've achieved. To have issued the money through a tendering process that was fair and open and honest, and that resulted in qualified contractors actually doing the work. And as we've heard from Mr. Dreeshen before, we know to what extent the First Nations rehabilitation folks were involved with actually the decommissioning of some of these wells. They do tremendous work, but because money is available doesn't mean it has to be blown out the door and squandered. And yet this preamble would suggest that would have been a better solution than returning the money to the federal government unspent. And I think what we should be doing is commending Alberta and saying, wow, you, Premier Smith, you've done a phenomenal job of making sure that you've responsibly stewarded the money that the federal government gave you for a specific purpose. You weren't able to just spend the money frivolously and without accountability, and so you've returned it to the federal government. And you kindly asked us for an extension to use the money responsibly, and we said no. And this Liberal government should be praising Alberta and Premier Smith for the good work that she and her government is doing there in Alberta. The next bullet point talks about Saskatchewan. And again, in my beginning earlier comments, I had indicated that this government is a government of division that seeks to create disunity and division right across Canada. And so why a preamble would have to swipe at a neighboring province to try and create some kind of animosity between the two provinces? Only a Liberal would know what the motivation behind that would be, because I don't think there's any good reason to create animosity between provinces. We should rather be trying to build unity across this country. And that's not something that a bullet point like this does. It also says that companies who abandon wells and fail to pay for their cleanup negatively impact provincial taxpayers and municipalities. That's true, they should, and that's why I think the regulatory bodies, including the Alberta Energy Regulator, seeks to monitor this carefully and to hold the individuals to their responsibility that they committed to when they drilled these wells and when they exploited the resources that were in these wells and sent them to market. And I think when they've chosen to no longer have them as productive resource wells, that they have also followed up, and if they don't follow up with the owners of these wells to make sure that there's proper remedial action taken, that does cost provincial and municipal taxpayers money, and I think that's why the regulator is on top of these things, and I think doing a good job. But to have that as part of the preamble, I don't think we've been hearing from any provincial or municipal taxpayers that they think it's an issue, and so why would you put that in the preamble? Again, to create division and animosity among people and to incite divisiveness. Orphaned and abandoned wells present an economic opportunity to support energy solutions like geothermal energy. Not sure where that bullet point comes from, but it sounds like you want to repurpose an oil well to be a geothermal energy source. That actually might be worth studying. Could have been part of the motion, but here it is. We see it in part of the preamble. And whether there's opportunities there, who knows? I'm not sure how geothermal and oil go together, water and oil. I know my experience, Mr. Speaker. Whenever I put oil and water, the two don't seem to want to commingle together very well. And in fact, they do separate. And that's actually been part of the process of oil extraction, sending steam down and having the oil come up. So I'm not sure about the validity in that. There could be a business case there. Who knows? Probably be worth the study. But I think the point I want to get back to again is found in the first couple bullet points there, and that's that it seems as though the province of Alberta has been unfairly targeted by this Liberal government again, instead of recognized for the economic prosperity that it gives our entire country. And I think there should be commendation shown to Alberta for the good work that they did do in responsibly using over $800 million of the funds that was given to them to actually fund remediation projects for abandoned and orphaned wells. And I think it would have been wise of this Liberal government to have actually granted the extension to Alberta and said, hey, you've got qualified contractors. We want you to continue actually to use qualified contractors. We don't want you just throwing this out on the market and hiring contractors that, first of all, may not be properly trained and vetted to do this kind of work. They may not be competent in this kind of work. And I don't think those are necessarily the types of contractors that we want to actually award projects like this to do completion. But as we've heard, there are responsible contractors. There's people that are trained. They've got good safety programs. They employ Indigenous. Many of them are actually 100% Indigenous-owned contractors that complete these remediation projects. And I think to grant an extension would have been actually the thing that this Liberal government should have been. And it would, you know what, it would have been a non-issue, Mr. Speaker. And the other point I have with this, the problem I do have with this motion is we're currently in the midst of two studies, the TMX pipeline project that Mr. Angus has really promoted at this committee to study what exactly happened that took this TMX pipeline from a cost of what initially was pegged at $9.7 billion. And by the time the federal government took it over or purchased it, it grew to just under $13 billion and has now exploded to $34 billion. I think that's a very worthy study and one that this committee should have been seized with. I don't think we've actually gotten quite to the bottom of it yet, and yet I think our study will be wrapping up soon as far as hearing from witnesses. But we've got a lot of work to do on that study. We've got to give the analysts time to write a report, and we've got to give them time to actually sift through all the data that's being submitted by the witnesses that we've had at committee and those that we weren't able to listen to. They've got to compile all that data and actually put a report together that's going to be cohesive for this committee to actually study and review. And I think it would be important that we get that done before we embark on another study. And then we've also been looking at electricity, the capacity we have in this country and the grid, whether it's sufficient to meet the demands that seemingly are increasing right across the country for electricity and especially for clean electricity. I think that's been a really good study. We've heard from some very, very good witnesses there. These are industry people that understand the situation and they understand the economics here in Canada. And that's a report that also needs to be written and studied by this committee as well. So we have a significant workload here that we've undertaken at this committee. And Mr. Chair, I just think it would be helpful if you would take some time together with the clerk, sit down and prepare a schedule for this committee as to when these different things are going to happen. When we're going to be continuing the study with TMX, or are we jumping back to electricity? And rather than to have these motions thrown in front of us by Liberal parliamentary secretaries to conduct yet another study when we've got two that we're in the middle of and we haven't finished. And they're both very important studies, Mr. Chair. And I would really hope that you, as the chair of this committee, would take some time, prepare a schedule that we can review and approve, and at least we know what we're going to be doing here. But I think our plate is full. I think this. especially the preamble is very very sad, and I would question its appropriateness is actually for trying to create a cohesive and an atmosphere around this committee that would lead to doing productive work. Mr. Chair, I'll cede my time at this time to you, and I'm sure that other speakers that have opinions as well that will make them known. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Falk. We'll now go to Ms. Goodridge, who's online. Ms. Goodridge, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's been really frustrating as I've been sitting here listening to some of these arguments and attacks being made. And it's really interesting because one of the things that was said was, well, Saskatchewan managed to spend all their money and Alberta didn't. Well, Alberta was $1 billion. Saskatchewan got 400 million. There's orders of magnitude difference between those two sums of money. And we're really having a conversation over the fact that the government of Alberta created a program, and that program had private people then spending that money to do the cleanup. And that's not something that happens just willy-nilly, or at least not in the case of the province I came from. I actually was an MLA at the time that this was being discussed, and so I remember some of those conversations fairly in depth. It was a program that initially was very oversubscribed, and to be able to do it properly and not have shell companies and companies like Dalian that the government of Canada decided to use that qualified for contracts under federal government Indigenous procurement, but was effectively a shell. One of the big challenges is the government of Alberta actually wanted to engage with meaningful work so that meaningfully these projects could go forward. And so that required Indigenous companies to get appropriate equipment, get the appropriate training. That doesn't just happen overnight, especially in the context of a pandemic, because this program wasn't simply about wells. This was about job creation. And the member from Ms. Jones from Newfoundland raised some really good points. There are lots of ties to the energy industry in Newfoundland and many ties between Alberta and Newfoundland. And that's part of why we have so much commonality. I've got many constituents that go back and forth to Newfoundland, as well as I have gone and retired back home to Newfoundland after having worked their career up here. And so it's really frustrating. And I don't know if most of my constituents that I would talk to that are from Newfoundland would appreciate the fact that the government of Alberta, and more specifically, the energy workers that are constantly under attack by this Liberal government. Because this is the problem that
we're just going to suspend for a moment. I know Ms. Goodridge does have the floor. We will suspend for a moment. Ms. Goodridge is not online, so we will go to the next speaker, and I'll go to you, Mr. Patzer.
Okay, thank you very much. Hope don't touch the mic, my bad. Yeah, okay, that's okay. I would hope that down the road, you know, this is the blessing and curse of technology, I guess, that sometimes these things do happen, and you know, certainly it wouldn't matter which party or which individual it was. I certainly wouldn't want to step on someone's privileges as a member. So hopefully that this doesn't create issues going forward as far as those types of situations that could arise from somebody's technology accidentally restarting on them or forcing an update through when the user didn't actually approve of the update as of yet. So, but no, I will happily take the floor for a few minutes until she can return, and then when she's back online, then I will be sure to turn it back over to her, because I know she was in the middle of some very important thoughts there. One of the things that I want to just talk about too, when it comes to, I think part of the heart of the motion here, we know that it's been a long-standing goal of the both the Environment Minister and the Natural Resources Minister to end the use of fossil fuels. And in fact, we see some of the, whether it's the emissions cap, whether it's the...
We have a point of order. Mr. Bruson, go ahead on the point of order.
It might be a matter of relevance. Right now, we're talking about a motion about wells, orphaned wells, and so I am not sure what the relevance is, and it is not even correct.
Thank you for your point of order, Mr. Bruson. I just would ask members to keep your remarks relevant to the motion at hand. Thank you, Mr. Patzer. If it's okay, Mr. Patzer, I'm going to go back to you, Ms. Goodridge. I know you had a bit of an interruption there, and we want to make sure that you have the opportunity to continue on with your intervention. So go ahead.
Thank you. The joys of technology. It's great when it works, and a little bit challenging when you have a bit of failure. But the where I was going, and I don't exactly know where I was when my computer decided to just shut down, is we wouldn't be having this conversation if this was an attack on another province. And the Liberals have made comments of like, well, this isn't, we're really talking about the main motion. Then what's the point of having the preamble? The process and procedure is very clear that they actually recommend against having preambles. Many people choose to put preambles to give some context, but this context is A, misleading, B, not accurate, and C, an attack on the province of Alberta, the province you and I both represent, Mr. Chair. And so I'm not sure how you can sit there in that chair position and allow a conversation to continue that is such an affront on the people that you and I have been elected to represent. And this is one of those complicated spaces that we're in because this government doesn't see Alberta as the relevant conversation piece or something. I'm not quite sure why this Liberal government has decided to continually attack. And it's not some backbench member of Parliament that brought this forward on their own volition. This is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources, which means that if the Ministry of Natural Resources didn't approve of this, we wouldn't still be having this conversation. So this means that this was the marching orders given by the Minister of Natural Resources. This means that this was the intention of the Liberal government under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to further attack Alberta and Albertans and Alberta workers. And this is one of the frustrating pieces is this entire motion is created to attack an industry and attack a program that was set up that didn't just throw money out the door like the Liberals did during COVID, but instead to make
Point of
sure that
order.
it was set up in such a way.
Ms. Goodrich, we have a point of order. I'll ask you to hold for a second. Go ahead, Mr. Angus, on the point of order.
Could the clerk read out the motion? I think my colleague has gotten, once the thing came back on the screen, she might have thought she was in another committee. I don't remember in the preamble it attacks workers. Does it attack workers? Could you read the preamble? Because I think she's very worried that we're picking on Alberta and all our friends there when we're talking about abandoned wells. So if we could get, if we could, and they think it's also attacking Indigenous people. I don't know if they read. So maybe there's a different motion out there. Could the clerk read
Point of order.
read the motion so that then
Mr. Angus?
the member wouldn't be so
Point of order.
confused?
Thank you.
on
I
this?
have a-
I think it would be very helpful.
Mr. Angus, I'll ask you to hold, please. I think you're done with your point of order. You've asked for information on the clarity on the motion
Yeah,
at
just so
hand.
we're on the same page and talking about something because it's very
we
hard
did
to
read
debate
it. We
something
did.
when people
Thank
are talking
you.
about.
Thank you,
something.
Mr. Angus, on your point of
I don't know
order.
what
The clerk did at the beginning of earlier in the meeting did read out the motion for clarity for members. If members do so choose for another update on that, we can do that. But I have a point of order from Mr. Patzer. Mr. Patzer, go ahead.
Yeah, perhaps maybe just for Mr. Angus's enlightenment here, there was the opportunity for lots of jobs and opportunity for Treaty 7, who had said that they were looking for the funding through the FSNRP in the province of Alberta to be able to use their expertise and their workforce. And by the Liberals saying no, in effect, they are directly saying no to those workers who have that skill set and that ability.
Mr. Patzer, I gave you some leeway to hear your point of order, but that is not a point of order. That's full on debate. And you're actually out next up on the list, so you can debate away. Thank you. Ms. Goodridge, you had a point of order, but you do have the floor, so I'm going to be going back to you.
I'm just going to go right into it, Mr. Chair. So I was going to raise in a point of order that I am more than capable and have in fact read the motion that we are debating and the preamble that we are debating. And I listened when the clerk read the motion and preamble, and I am capable of understanding what those words mean, which frustrates me that Mr. Angus somehow believes that that is not the case. But if it was an attack, but Mr. Angus, and here's part of the problem: Mr. Angus has a private members bill that is a full-on attack on Alberta's energy industry. He has made no ifs, ands, or buts about his dislike for it. But this is the absolute frustration that we are in right now, Mr. Chair, is we have this Liberal NDP coalition that sees the energy industry and by in turn the province of Alberta and the people of Alberta as lesser than. They do not support Alberta and our energy industry. They do not support the workers that get their paychecks from this industry. They want to see less of this industry. And this is where we disagree. I am proud of our world-class energy industry that we have here in Canada. I think that we need to do more to support it. And I'm proud of the fact that the government of Alberta didn't just throw money out the door to get it spent so they could check boxes to the government of Alberta, to the government of Canada, and instead decided to create a program that was actually robust and that they made sure that there was accountability, something that this government of Canada could learn a lot from. I know in Government Operations Committee, they are currently studying failures on the Indigenous procurement. Our House of Commons is completely seized and paralyzed because of the government refusing to hand over documents when it comes to a green slush fund. There is such a pattern of abuse of taxpayer dollars from this federal government that it is very frustrating that the government of Alberta, who was unable to spend all of the money under this program, decided, you know what, let's ask for an extension because we're showing that we are doing credible work. We are actually moving.
Ms. Goodridge, I didn't want to interrupt you because you're in So we're going to continue on with our next meeting with you having the floor, Ms. Goodridge. We are suspended as it's 1 o'clock. Thank you.